I'm Trevor Lai in Shanghai. Affluent Chinese consumers have turned the mainland into the world's second largest market for luxury goods. Last year, Chinese consumers spent more than $11 billion on luxury goods, not including private jets, yachts, and luxury cars. While the market is currently dominated by foreign brands, such as Louis Vuitton, Dunhill, and Rolex, a handful of Chinese companies are also entering the luxury space. We'll look at some of the challenges facing these luxury brands in China, and also our own PT Black will have a thought or two about why Chinese consumers can't get enough of luxury and what the future holds. But first, I'm here with Philippe Lamy, Chief Operating Officer of one of China's top local brands, Shang Xia. We're here today in the Sinan Mansions exhibit of Shang Xia, celebrating their first anniversary. Philippe, who's the target market for this exhibit, and what is Shang Xia trying to communicate here?
Well, what we are trying to do here is to allow people to experience the brand. The target market is anybody who is interested in Chinese beautiful object inspired from material, crafts, know-hows, and Chinese aesthetics revisited in a modern way.
And what are some of the items you're especially proud of here?
I think the one thing that touches me most is the eggshell porcelain, which is a very, very fine porcelain. Basically, we have balls this big, which the thickness is 0.5 millimeter, and I think it's extremely sophisticated work from craftsmanship. And I think it represents really the level of sophistication we want to convey. So one of the other items I find extremely emblematic to Shang Xia, and that talks to me quite strongly, is the bamboo tea set, which we call bridge tea set. Because behind it there is such an incredible level of craftsmanship. And it's very emblematic also because it's really about the hands. Okay? When you see the craftsman working, he has nothing else than his hands and a pair of scissors. And he comes up after hours of work with this beautiful object.
So when we look at the challenge of building a brand in China, one of the biggest obstacles is China's association and perhaps stigma still with producing cheap mass market products. So how do you combat that when you're trying to build the new Shang Xia brand?
Okay, I think when you mention China products to people, you have a part of the answer which is indeed cheap products, not very qualitative, but also I think part of the answer, part of the common psyche we all share is the fact that China has a very strong and deep and long history and culture. And I think people know about this. And so it's just a matter of awakening that part of their vision of China, but it's already into them.
Do you think the Western world is ready for a Chinese luxury brand?
Yes, I think so. First of all, I think when you look at the statistics, everybody concurs into the fact that within 10 years, Chinese customers will represent about half of the luxury market in the world. Okay. Now, this half will be split into two parts. One part of the consumption will be inside China. The other part will be outside of China. So, of course, being a Chinese brand, you probably have a privileged relationship with half of the market. Now, I really think that at this point in time, you know, people are ready to see a different type of luxury. At the end of the day, luxury is about point of difference, point of uniqueness. And we believe we have a strong point of uniqueness.
A lot of wealthy Chinese consumers are new to luxury consumption, and some of them are looking for status. Do you think that Shang Xia is a brand that actually helps them achieve that?
Not at all. I don't think so. And you know, I am not sure how many of the Chinese customers are into status. What I can tell you that is specific about the Chinese consumers is because China has lived through its own history of luxury at an accelerated pace, the types of consumers, instead of succeeding to each other, they pile up together. Okay? And so, in fact, China is an incredibly complex market in terms of consumer aspirations, behaviors, and attitude.
What's the single biggest obstacle facing Shang Xia today?
That's a good question, you know. I think Shang Xia is a baby. It's a baby company. So it's probably facing all the potential growth aches of a baby. And so there are a lot of obstacles. But I think if you want me to define one obstacle, I would say it's the biggest risk is not to be consistent in terms of style, okay? Because then you lose your identity.
And do you think some of the other luxury houses around the world, the global ones, are actually looking at you and seeing, they're allowing you to test the waters first and perhaps already starting to observe the successes that you've made in your first year and perhaps are coming in eventually to help build this market, as you say, but also provide some competition?
We see a lot of them in our store. They pass by quite often, so I guess they're observing. Being the first is not a problem. On the contrary, you get the first mover's advantage.
Thanks, Philip. We'll head back to our studio, and our own PT Black will have a thought or two about why luxury is so hot in China.
It should be no surprise that China is such a massive market for luxury goods. After all, we are talking about a huge population with a growing economy, not to mention relative isolation from the social unrest, financial trauma, and natural disasters that have disturbed the world's other major markets. But there is a deeper connection. Luxury brands thrive here because they operate in both horizontal and vertical dimensions. In much of the West, taste is defined as having a unique personal style. Be yourself. Follow your instincts. Ugly can be beautiful. Street style can be elegant. Under this framework, the only sin is insincerity. That's a horizontal market, which is great for creativity, but not so great for luxury. China is different. Thousands of years of rigid society have left a deep mark. People here acknowledge the difference between low and high. So taste is not about knowing yourself, it requires improving yourself. This is not about just showing face, which means tacky bling. Sure, that happens. But spending on luxury demonstrates your values, your culture, your virtue, your knowledge. This is the vertical dimension. Nobody understands this like the French. It's why Louis Vuitton knows to stake out the biggest, most lavish retail space at a mall. It's why cognac outsells whiskey, even at nightclubs blasting hip-hop. We're still at early phases here. After decades of austerity, China is rediscovering its imperial roots. My advice? Invest in Bordeaux.
Thanks, PT. With me now is Chloe Reuter, founder of Reuter PR, Edwin Song, Sinovate's Managing Director for Research Capabilities for Greater China, and Alison Mary Ching Yeung, founder and creative director of the Mary Ching Footwear and Accessories brand. Edwin, let's start with consumers inside China. Are there any local luxury brands right now that are attracting them when compared to the global luxury brands?
In order to be successful in the second, third, fourth tier cities, those luxury brands, whether they are Western brands or Chinese brands, they need to be very, very successful, need to be known in the first tier cities because those lower tier cities are the cities, first tier cities of tomorrow. So I think that's the way that they should be looking at the second to fourth tier cities.
But I think it's just very important to also think about the fact that in China, luxury brands is a very new concept. You don't have a history of luxury brands as you might have in Europe. You do have some brands that were considered imperial household brands or older brands that were specializing in, let's say, raincoats. But you really had a sort of throwaway of anything to do with luxury, obviously, for 30, 40 years until China started opening up in the late 80s, early 90s. So it's just a relatively new concept for people to embrace luxury, and that's why I think the Western players got in early, and with their heritage and education, they've actually made a real success in China. But I do think that there's an opportunity for Chinese luxury brands.
So looking and keeping that in mind, looking outside of China, are there any brands that have a chance, do you think, in the Western world? Is the world ready even for Chinese luxury brands?
If you look at brands like Qilin, the jewelry brands, they have shops all over the world. Shang Xia, which is a new shop, they're celebrating their first year anniversary now, but they have international aspirations.
So Alison, have you experienced from your own business and building a brand in China some specific obstacles or barriers that you had to overcome? For example, in terms of pricing strategy, do you find it that you're able to charge as much as, say, a new boutique brand starting in London or New York?
Yes. Well, you'd be surprised that the RMB is quite high in value these days. So actually the cost price, when you're looking at a high quality material and construction, of course it's not cheap as chips. And I suppose my frustration, my challenge is this stigma associated to made in China, which is that it's copied, it's cheap, and it's mass. And what I'm trying to show, and what my mission is to show that it can be unique, it can be quality, and it can be designed. So, you know, how does that affect your price strategy? Like anyone else, I mean, you work from your costs and your base, and you do your usual margins.
I think apart from craftsmanship as well as design, the heritage is something that Chinese brands do not have because of short history. And
I mean, there's 5,000 years of history in China.
Well, think of the 5,000 history. If you look at the back in the olden, actually, Chinese have luxury brands in the past. For instance, if you look at tea, silk, China, as well as things, all these things in the past were being exported from China to the Western world. So back to Chloe's question, the point on the Chinese brand have to have that kind of international presence with a Chinese element. So if a brand is successful overseas, a Chinese brand successful overseas, is the likelihood of being successful at home will be much greater if they grow from in-home out to the internationally to other countries.
So for each of you, I'd love to hear what's one local luxury brand that you think has the best opportunity to succeed overseas?
I mean, I think there's a few that have potential. I've mentioned a few. I think that we're talking about luxury for different audiences. In the case of Shang Xia, you're really talking to a cultured luxury consumer who appreciates the finesse of having zitan, wood, furniture, which has been almost sculpted and taken 3,000 hours to produce this wonderful tea table.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly target like the aspirational customer. So it's somebody that's coming into wealth and that wants to, once they've showed their status by buying all the big brands, I call them the big boys, then they get more into the kind of customization and confidence actually of creating their own style. And that's when they look at local brands, and quite honestly, they never had choice before of local brands. And I think that was a challenge. So that, you know, once they realize that there's some really talented brands out there that actually can dress them and can make them feel special, they're quite patriotic, so I don't see why they won't. And actually what I find is they'll buy my shoes and they'll feel very kind of empowered, and all their friends know that they're wealthy and affluent, and they want to know what they're wearing because they know that they've got all the big boys on them. So now it's kind of going the next stage, it's the next level of sophistication.
Well, as Edwin mentioned, the individualism that's important,
Yes.
you know, as one of the factors of luxury.
It's exactly what Alison says. It's sophistication. It's going away from the LV and the mass luxury brands that so many people have, and it's saying, I'm slightly quirkier, I'm different, I want to express my originality, and I'm going to buy wonderful shoes which are very niche.
I'll call them the successful hedonist who know how to enjoy life. Luxury brands as a lifestyle statements. So this is a very niche group among the luxury consumers.
Yeah, and I mean, I just go back to another example. I was invited to speak at the One Pool in London back in May, I believe. And I was on a panel with a McKinsey analyst, and he said that not only is there an opportunity for luxury brands to come into China, which obviously everybody's trying to take advantage of, that there's an opportunity for small homegrown brands to find presence. And I think this is why it's exciting and why there's certainly and absolutely an opportunity for local-born brands.
So in one word, what's the biggest challenge facing Chinese luxury brands that want to expand overseas?
I would say it's heritage, because if you compare to the Western luxury brands who started themselves since the 19th century, Chinese luxury brands do not have that kind of heritage that can be used to create that kind of aspirational stories for those Chinese brands. Okay,
this is very challenging, but I'd go as far as saying position. So position in the sense of challenging where you are to the next step of, you know, where you want to be, how you want to be seen, how you're going to communicate. I think that's going to be vital.
I quite agree. But I'd also say awareness. And they have a huge job to get themselves known by a Chinese audience and also an international audience.
Chloe, Alison, Edwin, thanks for joining us on Thoughtful China. That wraps it up for today. Be sure to subscribe to us on Tudo and YouTube, and you can also follow us on Weibo and Twitter. We'll see you again.